Hello, welcome back to the InsTech podcast. Zoya, podcast producer here. This week, Matthew and Robin are wrapping up 2024 with a reflective and forward-looking discussion. From augmented underwriting to algorithmic claims, they're unpacking the key themes shaping insurance technology this year. Robin highlights the rise of market makers, those who've successfully broken through with innovations like smart follow syndication and digital TPAs. Meanwhile, Matthew dives into the growing significance of secondary perils, the role of parametric solutions, and the wave of new catastrophe modelling providers poised to transform risk analytics. And of course, it wouldn't be InsTech without a touch of AI. The duo explores the emergence of agentic AI, how insurers are learning to trust decision support systems, and the balance between innovation and practical application. Whether you're here to stay ahead of industry trends or just want Robin's wine recommendations for the holiday table, this episode has something for everyone. Now let's dive into the conversation.
Morning, Robin. It is Friday the 13th. It is the end of a week when we had our Christmas party and we've both been out and about a bit. That feels like quite a challenge to keep going, but I'm sure we'll push on through. How's your week been?
Well, I'm very glad we didn't try and record this podcast yesterday. I don't know quite what came over me at the InsTech Christmas party, but yesterday was a very long day. I apologise to anybody who had to talk to me in the course of the 8 hours I tried to work.
You were very jolly on the party itself, so I think that's a fair price to pay. So as normal, we're fairly modest in our location for doing the podcast. We know other podcasters in our world do this from yachts, an exotic part of the world. I guess the most exciting thing that happens when we talk tends to be some wildlife that sort of strays across your line of vision. Anything we should be looking out for today in your part of the world?
No, I mean, don't tell the man who looks after Highgate Woods, but he will find that his epidemic of parakeets has been kept under control. They tried to have a go at my figs this year, but anyone who came near them was dispatched, frankly. I mean, it's a no tolerance.
Parakeets are, I guess they're a bit like flying rats, aren't they? And I was doing a bit of research onto the successful podcast. Do you know what our most successful podcast has been, and the takeaway from that in terms of one top tip for doing good podcasts?
I don't actually. You're stato when it comes to these things. I'm going to guess wine tastings. What do you do with wine tasting?
Well, I'm glad you got wine in early. No, this actually was your podcast, and it was our predictions podcast from about 3 years ago. And the clear takeaway from that was the more people you have on your podcast, the more successful your podcast is, because we had 21 people on that, and it still holds the record for multiple thousands of downloads. So I think one maybe lesson for next year is to get more people onto the podcast in one go. See if we can break your record for the predictions event with 21 people.
It was really good fun. I'd love to do it again, but of course it was a lot of work. I mean, in the end, what we did, we didn't have everybody together. We recorded them all separately and put them together. So I'd love to do it. Let's see whether someone will pay for it. That's what we really need.
Yeah, always welcome some money coming in. And as we get to the end of the year, what are your reflections on 2024?
I think it's been a bit boring, actually. I think it's been a year of steady as we go. I think I was expecting much more. I thought 23 produced some really interesting businesses. I thought we'd push on with the kind of algorithmic, a bit more of the automation, a bit more of the algorithmic stuff. It hasn't really happened very much. I think it's partly understandable. People have got to go backwards to go forwards. You can see that a lot of work has been done on getting data knocked into shape in kind of responsible, regulated AI. But it feels like a year in which of consolidation, of getting ready, and one would hope to see a lot more in 25. I don't know what you would feel.
Sometimes we need a bit of boring, and I think you coined this phrase, boring but brilliant. So there's some things going on that might be not the most exciting ideas in the world, but actually are being quite successful at helping companies save money, in some cases make money, which I think might even be an event for next year, isn't it? Boring but brilliant.
We're definitely going to do an event called Boring but Brilliant. I've met a whole bunch of people recently who've stayed below the radar, created interesting businesses, didn't get messed up in insurtech for insurtech's sake, have built value, clients like them. It's time to give them a moment in the sun. Watch this space.
Right. Well, we're 5 minutes in. I'm not going to allow you any more doom and gloom for a while. So we've got to get more upbeat. So there must be one thing that you can take away from 2024 that you feel good about is going to sort of see us moving ahead next year.
No, look, I think if I took one thing away, it is that there are real market makers who are leading the way and everybody else is going to have to follow. What I mean by market makers is people who have changed a business model, invested heavily and been successful, and everybody else now feels, for one reason or another, will have to follow suit. I'll give you some examples. The reason a lot of money is being spent in smart follow algorithmic syndication is because of Key. It's 3 years old. Everybody hoped it wouldn't work. It has the right, give or take $1 billion of GWP this year. And now there's a flood of activity in that area and lots of people looking to do something, probably not as ambitiously as Key. There's another market maker in claims in reserve. They've built a digital TPA being a third-party administrator, claims outsourcer effectively. It's far more digitized than the incumbents. There's now, in Claims Sorted and others, people who are following into their footsteps. The incumbents are starting to have to invest along similar lines. They've made a market. They've changed a whole segment of the community, which is having to digitize in order to compete. And the last one I'd put in that category is HX, hyper exponential. That's, in my view, the best specialty pricing engine there is. And its competitors have had to up their game to stay with it and have had to invest a lot of money in order to be able to win their share of RFP. So they changed the market. So where there is activity, it's because somebody broke through the barriers, did the hard work, created good businesses, and has dragged the industry along their way.
See, there you go. It wasn't that depressing last year. There's lots of exciting things to talk about. And smart follow, we understand that here in London, but just for those people that might not be familiar with what that means and what Key does, can you just give a kind of very quick elevator story of what smart follow is?
Yeah, in the specialty world where risks are really big, they have to be syndicated. So one insurer can't take the whole thing. And what Key did was say, where the price has already been set, I don't have to do the same amount of work as I would have done where I'm setting the price myself. I can work out where in the past I've made money on syndicated risks, who was the leader of those risks, and I'll build an algorithm which says yes, 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 and decides on the line I'm going to take. It's an area which is going to become very popular, which is there are parts of the specialty insurance value chain which can be automated. It's no good saying it's nothing or it's everything. There are parts that can be automated, and syndication can be automated, and Key have shown that to everybody.
That was a very good summary. Who needs ChatGPT when you've got Robin on the London terminology? And I'm glad to see you're also spelling out those acronyms in there.
You'll notice I managed to talk for a long time there, and I never mentioned the word AI once. Don't think. We can't go long in this podcast. We've got wine early. AI. I've got to hand it back to you. AI. What do you think? What's going on?
It tells us something, doesn't it, about the priorities when wine makes it in there before AI. Of course, I think you've always got to differentiate AI from generative AI. I mean, I saw a good slide the other day that, I mean, it's very easy to visualize. You've got a big circle, and AI is your like big circle, and Gen AI or generative AI sits within inside that circle. And unfortunately, people throw them around a bit. And if you find a company these days that hasn't got we use AI somewhere in their marketing material, then they probably suggest that either they're very honest or they haven't gone with the flow. But it is starting to come out. Just to talk about generative AI, I mean, there are real applications. The way I've been thinking about it actually is a bit like electricity. And if you think back to when electricity first came out back in the sort of end of the 19th century, what you've got to find a use for electricity, and at some point you just even forget electricity exists, really. And I think that's how generative AI is starting to evolve, which is moving from something that everyone's desperately trying to work out how do I use it, to a world where people are actually starting to get the benefits of it without even realizing it's being used in their kind of day-to-day life. And one of the themes I've been seeing quite a lot, if you talk to people about this, is, for example, the rollout of Microsoft Copilot, and there's a kind of Google equivalent, which is essentially making your email more efficient or your spreadsheets or all those things just using generative AI. So that's one angle. And of course, on top of that, there are people that are building really clever things using the generative AI tools, including us, by the way, to be able to extract information and draw insights from it. So we can talk a bit more about that. But I know you've got a couple of examples you've been looking at as well.
My observation on the space would be that it's diverging fast. There are people who understand the power and the potential of this, are investing. I'm not sure that the benefits have yet manifest themselves necessarily. I think there was a lot of groundwork to be done, as I observed earlier. But bit by bit, you can see that there's a group of people who are moving away from, please will you structure my data, to I'm expecting much more from you than just structuring my data. I want you to help me make decisions. And that starts, I think, with triage or next best steps type of thing. But they're on a journey which is to test the levels of trust that they have, and they really believe it's going to change the future. There are others, they may have spent a lot of money 5 years ago in some failed OCR initiative or something. They're basically saying, you can't trust this stuff. I'll come only when it's done and dusted. And I had a very nice observation made at a dinner we hosted the other day, where someone said that you have to take an element of risk, and every day you take an element of risk about your underwriters. You expect your generative AI capabilities to be perfect before you'll use them, but you don't get perfect underwriters. You've got to work up to being able to trust something even though it's not perfect, because you've already got your head around that space when it comes to underwriters. So I think there are people taking more risk and they will get bigger reward. And I think those that sit around doing nothing, I think there's a price to be paid. We've put AI into our own tool set, haven't we? What did you learn from doing that, putting Iris into all our content over the years?
Well, I'll come to that in a minute. I just want to make sure the OCR you mentioned in there, for those that don't know the acronyms, is optical character recognition. So that's the ability to stick your document writing into something and it will digitize and give you the numbers back. Well, first of all, we've got to remember that everything we're saying now is being listened to by Iris, our digital intern, and is going to be there forever, sitting on the website to go and find, which is quite handy, but it does mean you can't get it. You can be careful what you say because it's easier to find. I'll tell you what's been really interesting about doing that. So just to explain what's happened. So we're working with a company called MyReach, and essentially we've got large language models that are now looking at all of our content, written content. It's listening to all the podcasts. It's listening to all of our YouTube and all of our webinars. It'd be a pretty horrendous job if that was a real person doing that. But what it means is now somebody can go in, bottom right-hand side of the website, ask a question about all sorts of things, and it's drawing all that information. And I think for me, a couple of really interesting takeaways from that, which is a good lesson about the use of generative AI more generally, is even when you know and you've got a fixed set of information to draw on, you realize how important it is to set the parameters of how those questions are being answered and actually what you feed in the background, because it can still confuse things. One of my favorite examples of where it made a mistake was the Proviso, who we work with, who do the flood forecasting, did a rather good podcast with a company called Donaldson Timber and Zurich, and the Donaldson Timber one confused Iris, because I went in and said who was on the Proviso podcast, and it came back with great authority and said Donald and Tim are on the Proviso podcast. So it's a reminder of, even if you're actually constraining how you use these tools to your own data, you can still make mistakes. So, and it doesn't deal with dates very well, and sometimes Iris is a bit lazy, and it will just take the first thing he or it has read and give you that as the answer, as opposed to reading all of it. But we're tuning it in the background. But that's been very revealing. Although I think actually where we've had the most success, and I suspect maybe even the most questions, is for your wine tasting event. And so anybody wants to know the wine recommendations and all the generous sponsors that we had for your wine event, Robin, can now find that as well. So that's quite handy to be able to get useful tasting notes from InsTech.
Yeah, as usual, our wine tasting was by far our most popular event. Before we get off AI altogether, I would make a prediction that there will be more and more discussion around agentic AI agentic in the sense that it's agents. And I'm not sure the industry is ready for it, but you can see the amount of investment going into this space now. And effectively, for those who don't know, agentic AI is effectively proactive AI. So this is AI that you don't have to prompt. What it does is it understands your ambitions or what it is you're trying to achieve from this process. It understands context and it will make the decisions for you. Again, there'll be lots of listeners who go, well, what an idiot. You can't be an underwriter. I'm not even suggesting for a minute to be an underwriter. But this can start to take series of decisions rather than one decision at a time. And it's work in progress. But you can see in insurance where there is a lot of grunt work, which leads up to somebody having to make a decision. Ultimately, there's plenty of things that bots can make decisions on. It's combinations of bots using combinations of types of AI, and it's making a series of decisions leading you towards your end result. And it is going to move us forward. It's really one to watch.
Yeah, I mean, there's that article from the Harvard Business Review you sent on to me, which we'll put a link in the episode notes. I think it was very helpful. The one thing that stood out from that, which you've alluded to there, is that the agentic AI as we know it today is about providing you with information, but agentic AI starts to make decisions. And that's the thing some people forget when you think about how do you present data and information. And ultimately, the reality is almost every technology company is at some point helping the buyer make a decision, and that's why they're paying money. But I think sometimes people tend to lose sight of that. And I think it comes a little bit back to your point about underwriters and what point do you accept that your augmented or algorithmic underwriter isn't going to be perfect. And I think it's a bit like self-driving cars. I mean, self-driving cars are a lot safer or will be a lot safer than humans driving cars, but they're still going to make mistakes and some people are still going to die. So what point does society accept? They're going to accept, what point does society accept that self-driving car is going to be 10 times safer than humans, but actually people will still die, but you still make a big saving. And I think it's true of algorithmic underwriting. What point do you accept that not every decision is going to be perfect, but you're still better off from an underwriter? And I think it's just a human nature of being in control, and the illusion of being in control means we're actually still a long way further off than you might think if you just looked at it from the sort of the analytics, because people don't like to lose that element of control. So, but yeah, agentic underwriting, look out for that next year. I agree with you. That is going to be a big theme, but I suspect it'll take a little bit longer than we might think before people are willing to take their hands off
for sure.
The equivalent of taking their hands off the steering wheel.
For sure. No, and I feel terrible now that what we've done is become a bit ethereal and talk about, what the future of the world looks like. This is a good time to talk about themes. 25. It grounds us back in reality. For me, the themes that we should have should follow the money. In other words, where are people investing most? Where are we seeing most interest in our calls? Back to augmented algorithmic underwriting, what the LMA report, the London Market Association report, calls enhanced underwriting. What can we do algorithmically? It's about portfolio underwriting, tracking as a tool set for underwriting. Lots and lots of interest in that. Then I think next best, again, lots of people looking to procure technology in that data ingestion meets decisioning, meets pricing, meets workbenches. How you pull all that stuff together? Do you start with ingestion? Do you put them all together? That is a huge topic, which is then feeding into claims. So what was happening in underwriting workbenches 2 to 3 years ago is now feeding into claims workbenches. Claims workbenches have been around in motor for a long time, but you can see them coming into specialty. I think those, in my area of sort of platforms, making underwriters and claims handlers more efficient, that's where the money is. And then, in your world of modeling, claims, exposure, what do you think the big themes are?
Yeah, so the big surprise, I suppose, recently, and we had an excellent webinar with Demex, and actually had the pleasure of interviewing my former boss, John DiMartini, was about severe convective storm, which is, you now know well, Robin, is hailstorm, tornado, straight line winds. These things often happen together. the areas that are happening and are expanding in the US, population density is growing. But in 2023, the largest loss from natural weather perils was $70 billion, and the next largest was only 13 for flooding. So I can't do the maths in my head, but about 5 times larger for severe convective storms. And the losses generally from weather perils have gone up by 7 times in the last 15 years or so. So you see this massive increase in perils that previously people hadn't really worried about too much because they were sort of sitting within the reinsurance level. What's happening now, these insurance companies are just literally unable to buy reinsurance, and actually some are actually going under. And it's just causing a real problem, which is where parametric actually does have something to offer, because for various reasons I won't go into now. You have to watch the webinar for that. Parametric can offer a solution, and actually reinsurers are still backing it, just not through traditional insurance. So we're on the one hand, we're seeing the increase of these perils that people previously hadn't worried about so much. Flooding another one, wildfire another one. At a time also, though, what's interesting is there's many more companies coming into this space able to offer the analytics and the data. So whereas probably 5 years ago you had really only 2 major providers of catastrophe models, most people know who they are now. We're doing our event in March, day and a half event, and we're not quite turning people away from the sponsorship because we don't want to turn money away, but we've got 25 companies that are going to be there talking about models and data. So there's an incredible richness now of organizations that are helping solve some of these perils. And we're actually sort of avoiding the climate change, what is it, when is it, how bad is it discussion. And it's much more about what's happening on a year-to-year basis and in the next 12 months in terms of how to actually handle these perils. But we're seeing it on the news, and it is having a real impact on insurance policyholders, all sorts of other things in there. So yeah, that's going to be a very big theme for us next year.
And by the way, well done for that event. It's our first move into an all-day or a day and a half event. I was a bit nervous about it. It's clearly going to be a success. From sponsorship terms, it already is. So congrats. And now, of course, I've got to try and find some themes and show you that I can do an all-day event as well. But if modelling exposure, secondary perils is that hot, presumably there's a lot of money going into it. The insurance and reinsurance companies want to go more about it. Are we seeing more and more startups, consolidation? What does the M&A world look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think we are starting to see that. I mean, that's one of my predictions for next year as well, is we're going to see more acquisitions, because a lot of these companies that were started around 2016, really the early days of InsurTech and actually the early days of InsTech, the ones that have survived have actually got to the point now where they're worth acquiring. Because we talked about hyper exponential, $73 million. That wasn't an acquisition, that was an investment. But Predicat liability modeling, that was acquired by Moody's recently. A couple other companies in that space, Cat Risk, were acquired by so basically, we're seeing companies now that've got revenue, profitability, and actually they're big enough to be acquired. Because the problem, if you're too small as a company, these large organizations that are looking to acquire startups like a Moody's or a Guidewire, it's just not worth them getting out there to acquire a company that's got revenues of probably less than 5 or 10 million. So I think we're going to see more of those. And then the other related prediction, which comes back to what you were talking about, don't want to call it boring because that's not really fair, but it's sort of ingestion of data efficiency. We're going to start to see real multi-million-pound dollar savings coming through from companies that are actually moving away from manual processes, or if it's a case of underwriting, being able to underwrite more because they've got an efficient triage. And I think when you see that happening, then you get a really compelling business case to say, yes, it does make sense to invest in something that might cost $1 million a year to license it, but actually if I get $10 million of saving, there's a clear use case for that. And I think there's another point there, Robbie, you might want to come back on, which is thinking about the world we service and how people market. There's a big difference if you're selling a product and you're selling in B2B, when you're trying to sell a product that could be from maybe 50,000, choose your currency, dollars, let's say, up to $1 million. There's a very different way you have to market that versus if you're selling some kind of subscription or something that's £1,000 or £5,000. But I think you've seen that as well, haven't you, talking to some of the people you've been helping expand their presence in the UK?
Look, I think that's a point really well made, and I think you're seeing it in the quality of new businesses. I'm not going to say startups, I'm going to say scale-ups, I think the tech is now so much better than it was 10 years ago. I think that insurers and reinsurers do have more confidence in it. I think that everybody has a much better understanding of the problems that need to be solved. And if you look at the new members coming into InsTech, and we had a good year from this point of view. In the recent months, that's been Recorder, Coherent, Federato, Claims Sorted, OIP Robotics, InsureX, V7 Labs. They're all solving a problem. They're all well backed. They all have traction. They have money. They know what they're doing. They're run by people who, mostly from the industry. And I have confidence in them, or we have confidence in them. You can sell them. The industry gets it. It feels like a better era, this, in which the disruption is gone. The technology works. There is money around because people have had a once in a generation series of underwriting years. For all the kind of 24 didn't achieve very much, the quality of the tech on offer and the quality of the people who provide it has never been better. And I think we see that in the quality of people coming into InsTech. And it's a pleasure to help all of them because they really do have something the industry needs.
See, look, you're getting happier and happier as you go on.
I've made myself. It's being with you, Matthew. It's being with you.
We're going to have to go and re-record that beginning because you might have put people off with that introduction saying how depressed you were about a boring year. If anyone's made it this far, well, congratulations. Yeah, and I think that point about the size, there's a type of marketing called account-based marketing where it's really all about identifying, those companies you mentioned, they are selling at high value propositions, not high volume. And it speaks to the success of what we've been doing on the dinners and the other events where that's a chance to meet people. But you can't hope to turn up to one of those things or just get someone's name and then you go and bombard them with emails and sell something to them. There's a whole process of cultivating people, understanding who they work for. But one of the really strongest factors of success, and if you think about all those companies you've mentioned or anybody that we tend to be able to work with, is if you're a technology company selling into an insurance company, you need to find the one person, ideally more, but at least one person who really values what you do. I kind of call them virtual salespeople, and that person is your internal sponsor, and they help you navigate the complicated way of selling into an insurance company. And I don't know how many people really understand that properly, that you can't just bombard people. You need to be able to cultivate people. But that's kind of the essence of why we're doing these dinners, isn't it? And other networking events.
Twice in the last 3 months, I've hosted dinners, which I've much enjoyed. And on the back of it, somebody's come to me and said, I'd like to do 10 of those in 2025. And my liver couldn't stand it. But I think the point that came out of it was your point. If you put 16 people around a dinner table and they're the right kind of people and the topic is hot, people want to talk about it, it would be very unusual for a sponsor of that dinner not to come away with 2 or 3 people who is going to be able to help them. It would be very unusual for anyone to come away from that dinner without someone able to be the internal sponsor for that technology in a company, having got to know them, having understood more, having seen what their peers had to say. I can't turn into a professional diner, but there are people who do these big events. They do them really well. They have a place. It's based on full panel discussions. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that as a way of marketing. As long as people don't ignore the fact that there is another form of getting in front of the right people, and that is these much tighter, much better curated networking events with fewer people in the room, but people who are much more likely to make a difference to your business. And I think you need a balance of those things if you're spending your marketing budget in 2025.
You do. And also, I think you could become a professional diner, but there's a couple of things in there. One, we should probably be charging more for those because they're really valuable. But also, anybody that you and I make an introduction to, we've got to be a bit selective about who we're doing that. And we're only going to do it for an organization and probably an individual that we actually feel is going to respect that relationship. You can't just keep introducing people to the potential buyers. The other side, actually, that which is thinking about the value is the podcasts themselves. And you've had some really good feedback from people because, of course, with a podcast, you don't know who's listening unless they tell you. But a couple of recent examples, I won't name names, but one organization, the founder was trying to close an investment round, struggling to get someone across the line. One of their early investors, the early investor, listened to the podcast and came back and right, I'm in. That I get it now. It's really good. And then somebody else who was saying, well, there's various other podcasts out there that speak to London market, and that's okay, but it's all the same people. But actually, he did a podcast with us, and he got 2 inquiries coming in from the US. That alone, again, is if you get 2 good inquiries and you convert one of them into a sale, that's gold dust. So podcasts are kind of, a lot of marketing people or sort of traditional marketing people like to have all their metrics and marketing qualified leads. But at some point, you just got to trust in the value of the conversation and the audience that people will hear what you're saying. And you might never know that someone made a decision to go and talk to you or reinforced it based on what they heard on the podcast. But we know anecdotally that we come across a lot of people who listen to this. So, quite surprising when you used to say to them, have you heard of InsTech? And they go, yes, I listened to your podcast. The value of those or these.
Well, it's back to this community of the curious. I think we have surrounded ourselves with curious people, and they have to be curious around how is technology and the data services going to serve the future of the insurance industry. And not everybody needs access to that community, but we've got it, we've built it up, and for those who want it, they can have access to it. But it's all driven by curiosity. I mean, who listens to a podcast, who comes to our events? Someone who wants to meet other people and know what's going on and hear about what the particular people being featured that day are doing. Without curiosity, we stay still.
Yeah, well, and we're pushing into YouTube now. We're not quite, I don't think we're not quite YouTube influencers, and we're certainly not getting monetized yet. So maybe Rob, we have a new business model next year. We can ramp our YouTube followers up. But that's my sort of a Christmas project, is to do a little bit more. And I've tasked the team with that. Look at what makes a YouTube video successful. And there's quite interesting educational angles to this. And so turning some of what the discussion we've had around climate risk into something more educational and broadening the audience, because that interesting kind of combination between audio and video. And I know that you when you try to sit down and relax in the evening or weekend, you turn your TV on and you get inundated with InsTech podcasts you should be listening to.
It drives my children round the bend. We turn on our smart TV and there's a picture of me and a podcast. It's a podcast host, and they're going, "What's this doing on here?" Well, it's a smart TV. It's giving you some smart stuff.
You and 1,000 other people, homes around the world, are wondering why do Matthew and Robin keep turning up on my TV set? Anyway, more on that space. Anything else we should be looking at for the year ahead?
Your Christmas project may be YouTube. I think I'll leave you to YouTube. I have other things to do this Christmas. Why don't we divide next year? And I'm in charge of dining. I'll do dining, and you can do YouTube.
So, Robin, what plans have you got for the holiday season, as our American friends would call it, or Christmas? I suspect it might involve a bit of drinking and eating.
Well, I bring out my very best at this time of year. Of course, the Mertens family are 3 generations for the first time in a decade. I'm not quite sure how young Evie, who's now 6 months old, is going to change the nature of my Christmas, but it's ultimately not my responsibility, so I shall be as badly behaved as I normally am. Because I'm conscious that we now have a bot, and more, as many people ask the bot about wine choices as they do about the future of agentic AI, I'm going to give you my house wine of the season. On the white side, Gerard Bertrand Heritage Claret. That's from Majestic, 17 quid. Absolutely fantastic. And another top tip for 25, Georgian red wines. I see them more and more in well-curated wine bars and wine lists these days. There's one called Saparavi 2021 Bidoba. You can see it in various places. But the Christmas table at the Mertens family 2024 is the last bottle of Leo Villebarton 2024, and I've just bought myself half a crate of the Wine Society's 150th anniversary 2011 vintage port. I only ever drink port at Christmas. Every time I drink it, I feel that I may never drink it again, but I'm in again for another year. That's the Mertens family wines this Christmas.
That's great. Well, that's a good test of Iris to see if that's picked up all of your wines, and then we will see how quickly those can be replicated. People can go back and actually check them. It'll be highly efficient.
Are you heading to Wales?
We'll be in Wales, and there are 365 species of birds in Anglesey. And you're a bird watcher. You're well ahead of me on this, and I think I've managed to photograph 60 of them. So my mission, the holiday, is to go and get another. I'll be satisfied with 5 or 6. And I've discovered actually on this topic that actually I'm not a big Facebook user at all. But what Facebook is quite useful for is for people who are finding birds and photographs of birds, and they sort of tell you where they are. So that's actually given me a bit of an extra help. So the digital world is actually helping my search for some more birds, some more waders, probably, given the sort of season.
There's a subtle difference between being a bird watcher and goes spotting birds, and there's a twitcher. Now, if you're a twitcher, and I think you have to be very careful about being a twitcher, because a twitcher is somebody who gets a bit consumed, like you're on the edge of being, and crosses the country to find some and you quite often see them on the roadside of that 20 with 1 meter long cameras. I don't mind you being a bird watcher, Matty, but don't become a twitcher. That would worry me.
No, that's my engineering background. You see, I'm afraid I've turned your pastime into something that's got data and analytics and some digital bits of capturing them. So now, not quite on the twitcher side, but I do get very lot of satisfaction from adding to that list and crossing off the ones I haven't seen. So hopefully you'll still talk to me after that. But I don't think I'm quite obsessed enough to go and drive around the country trying to hunt down the last couple of them.
No, well, it's a good place to. I can't think of a better way. Get you outside, and you can't be born and brought up in Norfolk and not have an interest in birds. Good way to sign off. Enjoy your Christmas. Good, always good to chat. You've cheered me up no end. I'm a better man than I was half an hour ago.
Brilliant. Well, I think we might have to put that at the beginning, and then we'll take it. Anyway, you get back. Yeah, it's Friday. It's I'm surprised you're actually still talking to me. It's like lunchtime. So I'll let you go enjoy the rest of Friday, and we'll see each other next week, though, because we're not totally done yet.
Great. Thank you, Matthew.
Well, if you've made it this far, then I'm pretty sure you found that as interesting as I did. If you haven't already heard, Exponential Risk London is a new 2-day conference hosted by InsTech, dedicated to addressing the evolving needs of the global catastrophe and climate modelling community. Tickets are now on sale, and hopefully we'll see you in March. That's all from us this week. Goodbye.